Hi everybody, this is some old guy playing, and what I'm doing something today is just a little bit unusual. It's not something I normally do, nor is it something that I'm likely to continue doing for several reasons. Not the least of which is I'm terrible at extemporaneous speaking. But I've been watching a little bit of the chaos that goes on. So today, one time only, uh, we're going to do a response to Liana, pardon me, I'm sorry, Liana K's most recent video on the ninja subject. Now, as nobody of you knows, I'm married. I'm an old guy, and I come from a more traditional upbringing than probably your average, YouTube personality. I'm not really even a YouTube personality, other than the fact that I do this for a hobby. So that being said, I just kind of I felt the need to come out and say a few things. Now, first, before I go anywhere, I have to say this. Liana K is someone who I respect a great deal. Watch her videos, subscribe to her on Twitter. She's someone who I respect a great deal. Now, that being said, I don't always agree with her. And in fact, it's a pretty even hit or miss whether or not I'm going to agree with Liana on any given topic. But here's what I always do: I will always respect her because all of her opinions are well thought out and articulate, and she comes from a place of trying to account for emotion without letting it rule the topic. She's definitely someone who I respect in a lot in that way. Being someone who's more logically oriented myself, that's something that's very important. So let's just kind of get to the meat of it. Sorry, I wanted to articulate some of this to my no subscribers. So all 14 of you guys, I love you. So, but having said that, there was some subjects that she brought up that I disagreed with. Many that I agreed with by what she had to say, but in particular, there were some subjects that she brought up, which is, for instance, the idea of turning off flirting. You're done with that. You're of a certain, you're married. It's time to stop flirting. Now, and then she used the example of how she knows some people who are very outgoing, who make compliments to people, and they're just genuine compliments. It's not flirting or whatever. So, little story time. That used to be who I thought I was. So, I have some coworkers doing the work thing, just going about my everyday. And one day, one of my coworkers turns to me and says, "Man, you flirt with every woman." And I said, "No, I don't flirt with women. I'm friendly. I'm just friendly." And they said, "No, no, you flirt." And I'm like, "Well, no, I talk the exact same way I do to males and females." And they said, "No, you don't." So it was kind of an interesting. I was very taken back by this this concept, and I went home and told my wife. I was like, "These guys think I'm flirting with every woman out there." And my wife responded with, "Well, you do." And I'm like, "No, no, I don't. I'm just being nice." And she's like, "No, you're flirting. It's okay. It's funny, but you should know that you're flirting." And I was stunned, right? So the fact of the matter is that I'm someone who grew up in the South, like the true South, not south of Canada. I mean, as far south as you can go, basically. I grew up in the southern half of Texas, and there is a gendered way of speaking that we have a tendency to do down there in Texas. And it's interesting that I had, without even realizing it, had internalized a different way of speaking to men and women. And unfortunately, the repercussion of that is when I thought I was being friendly to both men and women, my friendliness to men came off different than my friendliness to women. I still to this day don't admit that I was flirting because that would be rude and disrespectful, particularly with my wife sitting there. But whereas I have frequently said, like for instance, if I particularly like a haircut on a man, I've frequently said, "Man, I like that. That looks really cool." Just I mean, even to we're talking like to a server or someone who's or whatever. Um, Apparently, my tone and cadence is quite different than when I compliment a woman. So, having said that, it's possible to flirt without knowing. It's possible to be perceived as flirting when one doesn't feel like they're flirting. And I know that that sounds strange, but it's something that I felt like I had to address. In some of these concepts. So, there's that. There's the flirting. Um, I think that given several hours of close proximity to someone else, it would be highly likely that if I were spending time with in a highly social environment with a female, at some point or another, the things I'm saying could be construed as flirting. So there's that, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that. Response of any nature, anyone's response for that matter. So there's that. Now, the other thing that I thought was kind of interesting is in her conversation, she doesn't specifically address it, but I know that the argument is out there that access is being refused based on gender, and that is 100% true. I'm not arguing with that, but what I am going to argue is that Ninja doesn't owe anyone access. He's got several relationships going on here, and one relationship is himself and his audience, and the access that he provides anyone else to that relationship is specifically between him and his audience. Now, if his audience was frequently requesting that he stream with females, in all likelihood, he would have to make a decision whether or not that was a relationship he wanted to respect and continue, or if that was a relationship that he felt, was one that he would be willing to sacrifice in order to uphold what he considered to be the sanctity of his other relationship, that between him and his wife. Now, having said that, I recognize fully and understand the vast unfairness of what I just said, because he can arbitrarily decide that he's only going to be streaming with, say, men. Then yeah, I mean, if there's nothing you could do, if there's no way to argue that, then it's unfair, and I'll admit that I see that being, exactly the case. If it was, if it was done on the base of race, he would have a real big problem on his hands. If he were saying, you know what, listen, I'm not gonna, stream with anyone from Vietnam. I just don't like, I don't like the idea of, my wife, whatever, she's got a problem with Vietnamese people, so I'm just not going to do it. I mean, that would be a huge problem. We all recognize that. Now, having said that, being a little bit of a libertarian, I would say, well, once again, that comes down to the relationship between his audience and him. If his audience doesn't feel like that's a fair assessment, if they say, listen, that's really unfair for you to have excluded females from streaming with you, and we would really like to say, for instance, we're a fan of you and we're a fan of this lady streamer over here. Maybe you guys team up, do a collab. Then he would have to decide, what he felt was most important. Now, having said that, I personally am, I'm married, and my wife has, during the course of our relationship, over several times, has reiterated in different situations, not, for instance, the same situation. It's not like I'm, doing anything else, but that she feels uncomfortable with me maintaining friendships of the opposite sex. And now Liana specifically addressed this. Her concept was one of consent, and I totally agree with what she's saying there. Now, but there are many people who disagree with this. When in fact I saw it pop up on Twitter, basically saying, "Listen, if your spouse won't let you have friends of the opposite sex, then your spouse is controlling. You need to get out of the relationship." And I felt like that was being unfair. So I responded and said, well, wait a minute. Now, my wife has asked me not to have friendships with, members of the opposite sex. Is that controlling? Now, you people listening might think that that's controlling. Um, I mean, who knows? Maybe I'm gaslighting myself here. I feel like it's a reasonable knowing the dynamics that occur between men and women, and I understand that I'm not talking about an ideal situation. I'm talking about a realistic situation. Knowing the dynamics that happen between men and women, there is a risk avoidance or a certain amount of risk avoidance that can happen. Now, I'm not a cheating kind. I'm not the kind who's likely to, uh, you know, not honor the promises I made when I entered this relationship. Now, having said that, when it comes to affairs of the heart, there's one thing you can guarantee is that when the happy chemicals being pumped through your brain at the burgeoning new love start happening, you're not going to think straight. You can't think straight. It's basically like being drunk, right? And so if you accept male and female friendships, which is fine. Nobody's saying that they can't be friendships, but if you accept them, then you also have to accept that at a moment's notice, when you realize you might be falling for this other person through whatever means happens, that you have to end the relationship. And if you don't end that relationship, then you are playing a risky game. Now, many people will probably disagree with me. Many people think that that would be old-fashioned or whatever, and you should just grow up. But or maybe that the matrimony, the idea of a permanent marriage or whatever, is old-fashioned. Whatever, that's fine. I'm not necessarily disagreeing or arguing with you. I'm just saying that for me, for instance, that wouldn't work. So I mean, there's that. Now, you don't have to be a believer in traditional marriage or traditional relationships in order for you to come to the conclusion that it might be an unacceptable risk factor. And once again, I realize I'm not talking about specifically Ninja's case here because Ninja said, I just don't want people saying I flirted, right? And I'm talking about a whole nother level of risk. I'm talking about a close interpersonal relationship that could develop into something else. So having said that, having made that addendum, it is possible to recognize without a belief in a traditional marriage or basically being a Mike Pence. It's possible to come to the conclusion that the risk isn't worth it, and that is when you consider the reality that is the case law and the legal requirements around marriage today. And let me be explicit. Ninja, for instance, if he knew or suspected that streaming with a female streamer could potentially lead to problems in his marriage, recognizing that may not be a mature or healthy outlook, but might potentially be a reality, then Ninja has to account for the fact that he is not just a member of a partnership that exists for whatever religious or legal institution that is marriage, but also he is the owner of a business and he has a business reputation and a money-making formula that he owes half to her. So if he knew that there was a risk that this could upset or cause problems in his marriage, then he also would know that given the current case law around what it means to be married in this modern world, that would also jeopardize his entire livelihood and his ability to function independently as a businessman. It's just the nature of the beast. If he were to have offended his wife to the point where she decided to divorce him, then that would hurt his name and his brand and his business. It would mean that she has access to some of those assets. Now, am I blowing this way out of proportion? Yes, I am. And the reason why I'm being so hyperbolic about this is because it's a worst case scenario thinking, which I find is very helpful when analyzing someone's surface level illogical actions, right? So on the surface, him streaming with someone is highly unlikely to cause a problem in his marriage. But in worst case scenario thinking, he might say, okay, yes, but what does it get me? What particularly does it bring me other than risk? And he could do a risk versus reward and still come to the same conclusion, even without focusing overly much on the Pence-esque traditional marriage thing, just dealing with the realities of the situation today. Now, having said that, I want to reiterate that my opinion, 95% aligns with Liana's. She's completely right about the way women are disrespected on Twitch, about how women who make use of their attractiveness to make money are looked down on. They're, the thoughts, that whole concept of that hoe over there. It's disrespectful, and really, as a Southern gentleman, you should never treat someone like that. The other things that she was saying are all pretty much spot on, but I just, I had to speak up and say, listen, flirting isn't necessarily a conscious thing, at least not perceived by outside parties. Flirting, and in a environment where you're trying to be friendly and have a good time on a shared gaming experience, I don't play Fortnite, so whatever. It might come across as flirty. So there's that. And then, having said that, there's also there's other ways to do the math to arrive at the same conclusion. Now, having said that, I think that for Ninja, it is unfair for him to have come to this conclusion. But I don't know his wife. I don't know his life. And so I hesitate to speak about it, much the same way Liana did as well. So those are my thoughts. Let me know how much they suck. And this has been Some Old Guy Plan. And as always, kindly remove yourself from my lawn.